You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, where you'll gain the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need to erase the unknowns, feel in control, and have an even better birth no matter how you deliver. My name is Liesel, mom of two, practicing labor and delivery nurse, and your host. From over 8 years and counting of working at the bedside, I know that knowledge is the key to an even better birth. So tune in each week to learn about all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum from me, a labor and delivery nurse that's seen it all. And now let's get into this week's episode. All right, welcome back to the 12 weeks of labor, week 12. We're on week 12, and guess what? This week we're doing another birth story. Last week I had my mom on, but this week it's my birth story. I wanted to save this one for the very last episode. So this actually was episode 2 of the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast I put out way back when in 2019. And I told Walter's birth story, my 7-year-old. I can't believe he's 7. It's crazy. But I told his birth story because his birth story, just like I said in last week's intro, my mom, I credit a lot of the reason why I'm a labor and delivery nurse to my mom, and just my mom sharing how well taken care of she felt, by her labor and delivery nurses. I credit mommy labor nurses' birth to how well taken care of I felt during my own birth experience, and how empowered I felt during my own birth experience, and how I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want everybody to feel this way. And if I can do anything to help it, then I will. And yeah, it's great. His birth story really, really impacted a lot of things in my life. And I will say too, so this was back in 2019, and you'll hear me talk about my husband, who is not my husband anymore. We're not fully divorced yet, but he's not my husband anymore. And that is something that I have not really publicly shared, because I don't like to talk bad about people, and I don't like to share people's business. And I just didn't want to get on here or on Instagram and just give the wrong impression, because I think, sadly enough, sometimes when you share things about your life, it makes people who would have gotten valuable information from you look at you differently. And that's sad, but I almost was like shielding it because of that too. I didn't want it to like impact my ability to share information, and just for my, I don't know. I'm still working through it, obviously. But anyways, I talk about him in this episode. And I just wanted to come on here and just kind of clear the air, right? Because I know a lot of you guys have kind of figured it out. I've gotten a lot of DMs like, where's that guy? Where's that guy who used to be on here, right? Long time. What, are you still married? I get it all the time. Story questions. Oh my gosh. So I know you guys have kind of figured it out, but I just want to clear the air. Yeah, no. We're not, no, that's not happening anymore. And when I said I have a lot of feelings, I don't have a lot of feelings like, oh, I want to go to bed. No, that's not the feelings that I have. I have a lot of feelings over just sharing this and talking about it. And, it's like, gosh, I feel like I want to talk about it and just scream, and not scream in a bad way, but, just say, look, this is what happened to me, and this is what happened. And okay. I will say this. I was not in a very healthy marriage at all for a very, very long time. And I was scared to leave. And one of the things at the very end that helped me, was hearing other people talk about their experiences and their unhealthy marriages. And so because of that, I do feel this sense of like, well, gosh, like stories are so freaking valuable. Like I don't know. I mean, I think eventually I would have, I would have left. It would have gotten too much for me, but it really at the end there was like just me on TikTok, on social media, reading Reddit, right? Of like other people experiencing these things and me being like, wait, wait, is that actually what's going on? Is that actually what's going on? And I'm, like I said, I'm not gonna sit on here and just blabber, right? I'm not gonna give, I don't think that's right. But that was something that that was part of my experience, was just hearing other people's stories and hearing other people talk about their experiences and then relating it back to my life and being like, oh my gosh, this is actually what's going on. So I will say, if you are someone where you're listening to this and you're like, you feel that feeling, and you know what I'm talking about. You feel that like unsettling feeling in your gut, because I felt that for 13 years. I felt that for a long time, right? That this I'm not being treated. This is not right. You're not supposed to treat me this way. That you're probably right. You're probably right. And it sucks, and I'm sorry. But if you're feeling that feeling even a little bit right now, I encourage you, okay, to just go listen to other people's, go investigate and get curious. And then you can really start making conclusions and things start making a lot of sense. I'll just say that. So like I said, I think this is just part of my story, and eventually I'm probably going to speak a lot more on it. But right now it doesn't feel right to do so. But this is kind of the first time I've really opened up even a little bit about it. So I'll give myself a pat on the back, right? But like I said, my point is if you're relating to this at all, get curious, because if you feel like you're not being treated right in any sort of relationship, and it's so funny. I won't go into it, but okay. Sticking to the point here. If you feel like you're not being treated right in any sort of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, a business relationship, parent relationship, you're probably not being treated right. Okay. And get curious. Like I said, I listened and watched a lot of people's stories, and that's what started to cue me in, because it's like you lose your sense of just, is this actually what I'm being? Because you feel like, God, this person loves me. They shouldn't treat me like this. Like, this person says they love me. Why does it feel so bad? So it's like you almost like gaslight yourself, right, into thinking that this is okay. I guess this is okay, right? But no. So yeah, if you're relating to this at all right now, I'm sorry that you are going through it, but I've been through it, and it sucks. But if you feel like you're not being treated right, you're probably onto something. So trust your gut, and yeah, it's going to be okay. But anyways, I got a great episode for you. It's my birth story. And like I said, I talk about my husband in there, who's not my husband anymore. So yeah, okay, let's get into the episode.
All right. Wow. So Walter's birth story, I've talked about this with multiple people, obviously, and I've been on other podcasts and talked about his birth, and I've written it down, but I've never actually sat here by myself and really talked about it like in full. So I'm really excited to do this. I mean, I don't have a script or anything in front of me. I'm just going to be kind of talking from the heart and freestyling, and I have a few notes in front of me just to keep myself on track. But let's start from the very beginning of my pregnancy and kind of going back to when I found out I was pregnant with Walter. So this was 2016, May of 2016. Yes, it was May of 2016 when I found out I was pregnant with him. And let's go back even a little bit before that, when we kind of knew that we wanted to start trying for a baby. So I was at a New Year's Day party with some of our friends that host a New Year's Day party instead of a New Year's Eve party, which, side note, if you don't do that, you probably should start. New Year's Eve is way overrated, and I hate celebrating New Year's Eve. I love celebrating New Year's Day. Anyways, I was at a New Year's Day party that year in 2016, and I just kind of looked at my husband. We were celebrating, hanging out with a bunch of friends, and I was like, you know what? I think we should have a baby this year. I think I'm ready. I think this is the year that I'm going to get pregnant, and, this is our time. And he agreed. We had been married for a little over 2 years. At that point, we had been together for, 7 years at that point, because I think we were dating. Yeah, we had been together 7 years at that point and married 2 years. And we had kind of taken our sweet time. My husband, if you don't know, why would you know? He's quite a bit older than I am. So he's about 7.5 years older than I am. So right now I'm 30, and tomorrow is his 38th birthday. So we were kind of taking our sweet time on having a kid, but with our age difference, I feel like that kind of made a difference too, because I don't know, maybe we would have gotten married sooner into our relationship if I wasn't so much younger than him. I don't know. It was just the right time. Anyways, that's a side story. Sorry. So we decided that we wanted to, start trying for a baby in the year of beginning of the year of 2016. And another thing you might know about me, if you follow me, we go to Vegas every single year in May. My husband has a conference out in Las Vegas every year for his work. And so he goes out there every year for work, and I just kind of tag along for not work. And I've gone every single year, except I missed 2 years now because I have Walter. I missed that first year after he was born, and then the next year I couldn't go. But I had been every year up until that point, in 2016. And I said to him, I was like, okay, Brian, let's do this, but I want to go to Vegas. We're not going to start trying, until we go to Vegas in May. And he was like, that's fine, because who wants to be pregnant, especially in your first trimester in Vegas? That sucks. So that's exactly what we did. We went to Vegas in May and had a great time. And I'm pretty sure that we conceived my son in Vegas, or maybe shortly after. We were able to thankfully have no issues with infertility with him. And I came back from Vegas, and about 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. So let me take you to that day that I found out I was pregnant with Walter. And honestly, it was so surreal. I took that test, and I was working night shift at the time. I remember it was like a Tuesday, and I had woken up for my shift, and it was a few days even before I was supposed to miss my period. And I had a feeling, but I'd taken plenty of pregnancy tests in my life because I'm just weird like that and I have anxiety. So I knew how to take one, but I had never obviously had a positive one before. So I took one, and it came back positive. I remember sitting there at the toilet and I'd just taken it and seeing you see the pee kind of cross the little window, and I saw the control line come up, and I probably gave it 30 seconds and I didn't really see anything else come up because I was early, right? It wasn't going to be a super crazy fast positive pregnancy test. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not pregnant. It's fine. So I put it down, and I got up and, washed my hands. And then I looked back at it. It was probably a minute and a half or 2 minutes later. And I saw the faintest tiny little line. And I was like, holy crap, are you kidding me? And I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My heart just started beating really, really fast. And it was the craziest moment. And I love it. I remember it so vividly, but I couldn't believe it. So my heart was beating so fast, and it was, I was supposed to go into work this night, and it was probably about 4 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. And my husband was home, but he was on a conference call at the time. So I remember I was in our master bathroom, and I had taken this test, and I didn't tell him that I was going to take it or anything. I just kind of took it. And I didn't want to go out and bust out during his conference call and be like, oh my God, look, blah, blah, blah. I didn't want to ruin his conference call. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to wait in my room until he's finished. And then I'm going to go out and tell him. And no lie, guys, it was 45 minutes that I was sitting in there because his damn conference call was so long. So I was just sitting in there going crazy. I had this positive pregnancy test and I can't do anything about it. So he finally gets done. I go out there and I am shaking. I can't even speak. And I show it to him and he was like, no. He was like, this. And he looked at it in the light. He was like, it's too light. He was like, it's not. It's too light of a line. I was like, no, Brian. I was like, you Google it. If there's any sort of line on a pregnancy test, it is positive. And so he totally didn't believe me that it was positive. He did believe me, but he just was very skeptical because the line was so faint. And he was like, okay, Liesel, go out and get one of those digital tests that say yes or no. And then I'll start to wrap my head around this. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I was going to do that anyway, but okay. So I went to work that night. There was one friend that I had, and I had told her, and she had kind of known that we were trying. And I told her, what had happened, blah, blah, blah. And so we worked all night, and I came home in the morning. I stopped at CVS and got another pregnancy test, and I took it. And sure enough, the little digital thing came up and it said yes. And so finally Brian was like, okay, okay, this is real. And so at that point, obviously I was very early. It was a few days even before my missed period. And my pregnancy, let's get into, how my pregnancy was before I talk about his birth. So my pregnancy was pretty good. I really, really enjoyed pregnancy. I think I was just one of those people that really, really tried to enjoy every single minute. I did have some morning sickness and kind of all day sickness in the first trimester. And mine honestly kind of peaked at 12 or 13, even going towards 14 weeks. I remember it being really bad at the end of my first trimester, but I didn't throw up a lot. I just kind of felt sick the entire time. And, that sucked, but I was pregnant and I was so excited that I was pregnant. And I was like, you know what? It sucks being sick, but this is just so cool. So the only kind of scary thing that happened during my pregnancy was I did have quite a bit of bleeding in the first trimester. I had what was called a subchorionic hematoma / hemorrhage because I did have bleeding. And they saw this on my 7-week ultrasound. When I went in for my very first appointment, they saw this on my ultrasound, and I had already kind of had some brown spotting before that appointment. And they confirmed that, it's definitely not a miscarriage. It's just this stupid little subchorionic hematoma, not harmful at all. So at 7 weeks, I had a little bit of that bleeding, and that was not scary because we had kind of caught it at the same time when I went to that ultrasound. And then at about 13 weeks, I remember it was the last day of my 13th week. I was 13 weeks and 6 days. And again, I had just come home from night shift. I was just getting to lay down in the bed to go to sleep, and I felt like a gush come out. And it was weird because that day at work, I think I worked antepartum, and we had some patients come in quite frequently who had broken their waters early and who had had early losses. And so immediately I thought that I was 13 weeks and my water had just broken and I was getting ready to lose my baby. I didn't even think for a second that it would be blood. Obviously I just worked night shift. I was really, really tired. And I just thought, oh my gosh, my water just broke. And so I'm laying in the bed, freaking out for a second. And then I stand up and I realize that it's blood, and it's a lot of blood in my bed, a big puddle of blood. And it looked pretty red to me. When I went in for evaluation, they said it was more of a rusty color. So I get up and there's all this blood on my mattress and on me. And I'm freaking out. I'm Brian was home, thankfully, at that point. And I'm like, oh my God, babe, what is going on? I feel like I'm miscarrying. Obviously, there's all this blood. That's my first thought. I wasn't having any cramping. I, wasn't having really any other symptoms but the blood. And so at this point, it was about 8 o'clock because, I just worked night shift. So my office thankfully was open and it was a weekday. So I called them, we rushed in and we got evaluated. And I'm sobbing. I'm a complete mess, the whole ride to the doctor's office. So we get there and they immediately get me back and do a Doppler on my stomach and everything was fine. His heart rate it came up immediately and I was like, oh God, and I just started crying even more because I was so relieved. And, at 13 weeks, I didn't really have any movement or anything. It's so scary when you have bleeding that early, even earlier than 13 weeks if you do, because you don't have any movement. You can't have any reassurance that your baby is okay. And so I was so happy that everything was okay, obviously. So after they did the Doppler, they did a pelvic exam just to examine, my cervix and the blood that was inside my vagina. And she said, yeah, it looks, it doesn't look fresh and it's not actively bleeding, but it is kind of a rusty color. So it's probably a little bit old. So they also took me back for an ultrasound then to check and see if it was another one of those subchorionic hematomas, which of course it was. And thankfully at this point, this was the last one that I experienced. They put me on pelvic rest for a little while, which basically means nothing in your vagina. So no sex, obviously you wouldn't put a tampon in there, but basically no sex. So we did the pelvic rest until the bleeding stopped. And it was probably a good 2 weeks that I still continued to have a little bit of spotting and a little bit of brown bleeding. So we did the pelvic rest until then. And then after that, pretty much everything was fine. I went to my 18 weeks. I had my anatomy scan. And I don't know if you know this about me, maybe you don't, maybe you're learning this for the first time, but we didn't know if Walter was going to be a boy or a girl, and we chose that. So at the anatomy scan, when we went, we were like very adamant, don't tell us if it's a boy or a girl, we want to be surprised, and they were very good about that. But we checked on baby and he was completely fine in there, super, super happy, no issues, from the bleeding or anything. He was bouncing around, doing great. So then going into, the latter parts of my second trimester, my third trimester, everything was going great. I had a really, really great pregnancy. I worked up until the day that I gave birth. I was actually supposed to work the night that I gave birth, but I didn't, I called out, obviously, but I worked throughout. I didn't really have any restrictions. It was great. I cannot complain about the pregnancy that I had with him. All right, so let's get into his actual birth story and the days kind of leading up to that. So I had throughout my pregnancy gotten really interested in going natural. And when I say natural, I just mean without an epidural. I wanted to try and avoid an epidural if at all possible. So I did a bunch of research. I listened to a bunch of birth stories and talked to a bunch of people, read a bunch of books. And that was my thing. I really wanted to try and go without an epidural. So I got myself really, really excited to give birth and conquer, this experience of not having an epidural. So my due date came. I tried to do a bunch of things kind of before my due date to get myself into labor. Not a whole lot of stuff was working, obviously. And it was probably 2 days past my due date. And I got it in my head that I was going to try and do as many things as I possibly could in one day to get myself in labor. So I woke up that morning. It was a Saturday, I remember. I woke up that morning and I went and I walked around the mall for 2 or 3 hours, power walked around the mall, really, really got my baby to bounce up and down on my cervix while I was walking. And then after I did my super long walk, I took myself to see a reflexologist. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically like a really intense foot massage. So I went to this place near my house and I got this reflexology done and it was great. I mean, it was very, very relaxing and they pushed on all these points in my feet to try and get me into labor. So I did that. I wasn't, having contractions or anything at this point. So I did that. And then I went to the store and I bought a whole pineapple and I cut it up and I didn't eat the whole pineapple, but I ate as much as I could. And the thing with pineapple, all of these things that I did, obviously there's nothing other than Pitocin that is really going to get you into labor, other than your body being ready to go into labor and your baby being ready to go into labor. But you can still try and do all of these things to kind of encourage your body to go into labor. So the thing with pineapple is you're actually supposed to eat the core of the pineapple, which is kind of gross, but you're supposed to get a whole pineapple and eat the core part. So a lot of people don't realize that, and they say, oh, I ate a bunch of pineapple, didn't do anything. But they get canned pineapple or, just cut up pineapple from the store. But no, you're actually supposed to get a whole one and eat part of the core, because there is a chemical, and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but it's called bromelain, I believe. And bromelain is a chemical that is thought to soften your cervix and cause uterine cramping when you're pregnant. So you can do it, towards your due date to try and get yourself into labor. So I did my pineapple. I had seen my reflexologist and I walked around, and then I came home and I did some more bouncing with baby bouncing up on my cervix, and I sat on my yoga ball for a good couple of hours. And I think I watched Friends for a while, just sitting on my yoga ball. And then after sitting on my yoga ball, this was probably about dinner time. We went to go get dinner together at a place down the road, and they had these super extra spicy jalapeno poppers that were fresh jalapeno poppers. So I got those jalapeno poppers and I ate as many as I could. I couldn't eat them all because, they were hot. But I ate a bunch of spicy jalapeno poppers to kind of close out the day. And then we came home and we had sex. And I think everyone knows that sex is one of those methods that even a lot of providers will say, hey, try and, have sex to encourage contractions, because sex is thought to induce labor in a few ways. So first off, sex with or without an orgasm increases uterine activity. So it gets things going in your uterus, whether or not you're pregnant. Second, semen, if you have sex with a male partner, is a natural source of prostaglandins, which are hormone-like substances that are responsible for helping to change your cervix during labor. So when we talk about prostaglandins, a prostaglandins that we frequently use during labor to induce people is called Cytotec. And, a natural source of prostaglandin is semen. And so the last reason why sex is good to get things going is nipple stimulation. So nipple stimulation releases oxytocin, which is the chemical responsible for causing uterine contractions during labor. So that is my whole little spiel about sex. So we had sex, and it was probably, I don't even know. I worked night shift, so my sleeping schedule was all off. So I think it was probably 2 a.m. by the time I went to bed. And I remember going to bed, and I didn't, how you go to bed when you're 9 months pregnant, and sometimes you don't really sleep. You just kind of lay there and you close your eyes and you think that you're asleep, but you're not really asleep. That was the kind of night that I had that night. I was just kind of not really fully asleep the whole night. And I remember I was just kind of crampy the whole night. I wasn't really having full-blown contractions yet, but I was just crampy. And then at one point, I guess I fell asleep, because I do remember waking up and it was 7:30 in the morning and I had my very first contraction that I knew was a labor contraction, not a Braxton Hicks, not a false contraction, not a cramp. It was definitely, whoa, I just woke up and okay, today is go day. So being the nice wife that I was, it was 7:30 in the morning and I timed my contractions for a little while just to kind of see how close they were. And they weren't close at all. They were 7 or 8 minutes apart. And being the nice wife that I was, I let my husband sleep in because I figured, okay, I know I'm not getting any sleep. He might as well get some sleep before we head to the hospital. So I got up and I think I took a bath. I took a shower. I vacuumed upstairs. I folded some laundry. I tried to do as many things as I could to keep myself busy and just basically stall myself until it was ready to go. So I had called my doctor at this point, who was on call, and it was a Sunday, mind you. So I called her and I let her know what was going on, and she knew that I wanted to try and avoid an epidural. So she was very okay, no worries, try and stay home as long as you can, unless your water breaks or something. And I was still intact at this point. So I called my doctor, called out of work because I was supposed to work that night. And yeah, just kind of kept myself busy until my husband woke up. And it was probably 10 when Brian finally woke up. And so I'd been in labor for 2.5 hours at this point and just kind of running around doing stuff and taking a bath and trying to keep myself busy. So he finally woke up and he opened his eyes. Remember, I was like right next to him. He opened his eyes and I was like, hey, babe. So I'm having contractions. Like, we're going to have the baby today. And his eyes about popped out of his head. He was like, oh my God, are you serious? And so I was just calm, like, yep, that's what's going on. And so, of course, then he gets up and he's like me, that he's doing a bunch of stuff to try and keep himself busy. So we're both running around now. And at this point, I kind of got tired. I kind of was tiring myself out. So I decided to try and rest as much as I could, get in the bed, do a bunch of position changes with pillows and try and get myself comfortable. I think I, at one point, took another bath, took a shower. I just really focused on resting at this point because my contractions, unfortunately, were not getting that close together. They were increasing a little bit in intensity and getting a little bit closer, but I would have a contraction, every 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then 3 minutes and 2 minutes, and then I wouldn't have one for like 7 minutes or something. So it was very odd to me. And so I was just at this point like, okay, you know what? I might be in this for another good amount of time. So let me just rest as much as I possibly can. And so it was probably the afternoon at this point. My contractions were, again, starting to increase, but not really. So I was just trying to keep comfortable. And I think I ate a little bit at this point. I was trying to keep myself as hydrated as possible. And I ate some rice, I think, and some crackers. I really just I remember feeling so nauseous during the day that I really just could not even think about a whole lot of food, but I did know that I wanted to eat something so I could just at least keep my energy level up. So I did eat some rice and crackers, I believe. So at this point, I had eaten. I'm still trying to kind of get comfortable. And I had texted a coworker that I had worked with. And at this point, it was probably about 4 p.m. and I was still laboring. I was still trying to stay comfortable. And I had texted one of my coworkers who I knew was working that night, a good friend of mine, and let her know that I was in labor. And I asked her if she could actually come over to my house. And I asked her actually if she could come over to my house like on the way to work and check me, because I knew that was probably going to be about like 6 p.m. or something. So I didn't think I was going to head up to the hospital within the next couple hours. So I had texted her. She was like, yeah, no problem. I had honestly tried to check myself in labor. I had brought home a couple of sterile gloves from work and tried to check myself just to check my cervix to see what my progress was, but I could not. I tried in a bunch of different positions, but I could not because I was genuinely very curious to know, but I just could not bend that way. And this is not me encouraging you to check yourself during labor, but I did. I'm not going to say that I didn't. I tried. Before that point, I had been checked in the office and I was only about 1 to 2 centimeters. So I really just wanted to get checked to see if I was still that 1 to 2 centimeters. And this was maybe like false labor or something and it was just going to go away. Or if it was really bad prodromal labor, or maybe if I was at like 4 or 5 centimeters, I felt like I had no clue and I wanted a baseline. So I texted her. She was happy to come over. She came over and checked me. It was about 6 p.m. and I was 4 centimeters at this point. And she said I was 4 centimeters and 60% effaced and like -1 station. So I was really, really happy with that check because that meant that if I went up to my hospital, they would admit me. No big deal. I was 4 centimeters. I could stay. And so at this point, I knew that I still wanted to hang out as long as I possibly could. I wasn't planning on going up to the hospital at that point, but I just knew in my head that I could if I wanted to. So it was probably another few hours. I sat on my ball for a while. I tried to do some more position changes. Another thing that was going on throughout this whole time was that I had terrible, terrible back labor. It was awful. Like it was almost all in the back. I barely had any pain in the front. And that was really messing with me because I knew that my baby was probably posterior, and that was just completely throwing off my game. I was so worried about that and trying so many things to get him to flip around. So I was just really anxious going into that and going into labor knowing that he was posterior because I was having all this back pain. And I know now that I was obsessing over it. And if I could go back, I would just try and tell myself to chill out. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Even if you do have an OP baby that comes out OP, it's going to be fine. But I remember being so anxious about that because I had just had a girl in labor like a week before or a few weeks before, and she had an OP baby. And she ended up having a C-section. She got an epidural, late in the game, and she ended up having a C-section. And so I remember thinking about that patient, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be me. Like, I'm going to wind up getting to the hospital and have this crazy long labor, get an epidural at the end, and then push forever and end up having a C-section. And that's honestly what I was afraid of.
Wondering what you need to do to stay on track during each week of pregnancy? Not sure what you need to be learning or researching along the way? I can help. Sign up for our free weekly pregnancy series to get tips, advice, and resources tailored to your exact week of pregnancy sent straight to your inbox every week. Sign up at mommylabornurse.com/IamPregnant to get your first email today. See you in your inbox real soon.
So aside from all that, we'll come back to that later. My friend comes over and checks me. She goes to work, and then I'm hanging out at home for a while. And finally, Brian is just, anxious and kind of bugging me and just he wasn't telling me that we need to go up to the hospital, but I just was like, you know what? I think it's time we go. So we finally got in the car. It was probably 9 or so when we left our house and got up to the hospital because I live like 5 minutes from the hospital, which is really, really nice. So we hopped in the car, got to the hospital, and my doctor, who I had spoken with on the phone earlier, was there, and she checked me in triage, and I was 5 centimeters dilated, 80% effaced, and I think I was still -1 or 0. I can't remember. And my bag of water was bulging. It was still intact, but it was really bulging. She said very easy to break if I wanted it to be broken. And so I was happy with that change. That was really normal labor progression for a first-time mom. So I was 4 centimeters at like 6 p.m. and then 5 centimeters at 9 p.m. So I honestly was happy with that. And my cervix was a little bit more thinned out. So I told her, I was like, you know what? I think I just need to get my water broken. I think that's what I need to really get this to go along. Because at this point, I had been in labor for, 14 hours, and it wasn't so fun. And I was kind of doubting that this was going to happen, even though I knew it was going to happen. But I was like, okay, let's get this show on the road, break my water, and let's have a baby. So she did, and it was clear fluid. And then my contractions got way worse, and my back pain got way, way worse. So my nurse that took care of me, her name is Beth, and I love her. And she encouraged me to get in the shower and do a bunch of position changes. And I was doing great. I mean, it was probably a couple hours that had gone by where I was just kind of doing, well, maybe it was only an hour and a half that had gone by where I was just doing position changes and getting in and out of the shower and trying to deal with this back pain. And then one other thing I did want to add too was I had a doula that showed up at about that time. She was not a professional doula, but she was another one of my coworkers who was not working. So she came in to be with me. Her name was Nicole. So she was there to help me too. And that was fabulous. I'm so happy that she was there because she helped me so much. So I was doing the position changes. I was doing the shower. I was doing the birth and ball. And then it was probably about 11 p.m.-ish. My times get a little bit off, but it was probably about 11 p.m. And I wanted Beth to check me because I was just hurting so badly. And I was like, you know what? I just need something. I'm not ready for an epidural at this point, but I was like, I just want to know where I'm at so we can kind of gauge and what I can do at this point. So Beth checked me, and I think I was 6 centimeters dilated, like 90 to 100% efface and 0 station. And so I said, okay, great. Let's try to do some nitrous oxide. And our hospital had actually just got this instituted in our hospital. So I really honestly wanted to try it because of that, because we had just gotten it. So she got all this nitrous oxide set up for me, and I probably used it for 5 minutes. No lie. I felt so bad. I used it for 5 minutes and I hated it because it is this big mask, at least at our hospital. I'm pretty sure this is how it is most places, but it's a big mask that goes on your face. And I just felt like I couldn't breathe. I was doing so good breathing with my contractions. And then you would have this mask over my face with the nitrous oxide. And I felt like I just could not breathe through my contractions. So, I tried the nitrous oxide for a few minutes and I was like, no, I can't do this. So I trashed it. I got rid of it. I did a few more position changes. Maybe I hopped in the shower again. I can't exactly remember. Finally, I was like, I need some fentanyl. I need some IV pain medicine. So this was probably 30 minutes later, 45 minutes later, let's call it 11:45. And I got the IV pain medication and I got fentanyl. That's what our hospital uses. Many hospitals use different types of medication, but that is a common one that people are using nowadays because it works very quickly and it leaves your body very quickly. So it's very safe. So we did fentanyl. And I had Beth check me again right before I got fentanyl, and I was 7 centimeters at this point. So I was like, okay, I'm good. Let's do the fentanyl. I need to relax. So I got the fentanyl, and that was exactly what I needed, guys. I just needed a little break to relax in between my contractions because that was honestly my problem is I could not relax. Especially in between contractions. Like I couldn't relax during contractions, but I really couldn't even relax in between contractions. So this fentanyl allowed me to at least relax in the bed and take a breather in between those contractions. And I honestly think it was the best thing because it did make me progress too. And I just remember so vividly getting this fentanyl and just being in the bed, and Beth, God bless her, she was so sweet. I just remember her sitting next to me. It like almost makes me cry thinking about it because it was so sweet. I just remember her sitting next to me and like having my hand and just kind of petting my hand and just telling me like sweet nothings, like very, very calm words. And I just loved that. And I was just like, oh gosh, this is exactly what I need right now. So flash forward, the fentanyl wore off. It was an hour and a half-ish later, and the fentanyl had worn off. I was really starting to hurt again. And I told Beth, I was like, okay, let's check again just to see what I am. And then let's try and get another dose of fentanyl because I had made it that hour. You're supposed to wait 2 hours in between for most places, but our hospital has a policy that you can ask the provider if you can have another dose of fentanyl after an hour. So it was, probably an hour and a half, an hour, 45 minutes later, and my first dose had completely worn off. And I was like, oh, I need another dose. I need that first, feeling when I first get the fentanyl again, because I need to relax. So she checked me and I was like 8 to 9 centimeters. And she was like, okay, I'll ask the provider, see if you can get fentanyl. And she was like, yeah, that's fine. You can give her another dose. And so I got another dose. And unfortunately, it only lasted about 15 minutes. And that is common when you first get a dose of IV pain medication. It works great on the first dose. And then the second dose, not so much. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so 15 minutes later, I am hurting more than ever. I am dying at this point. And my back labor is so intense still. And I'm just like, oh my God, Beth, I cannot do this anymore. This is torture. I'm going to die. And so she was like, as she checked me, and I was 9.5 centimeters. And she was like, you are almost done. Like, you can do this, Liesel. This is what I'm screaming for an epidural at this point. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't push out. My baby's OP. And so she was like, no, you can do this. It's going to be okay. I will get you through it. You can do it. And so at this point, I'm going crazy. I'm going to call it about 2 a.m. because he was born at 3 a.m. on the dot. So it was probably about 2 a.m. at this point. I was 9.5 centimeters. I was trying everything to get that last little bit of centimeter to go away. So she suggested, because I was, 9.5, I just had a little bit of cervix slack. She suggested, because she did think that he was OP at this point still. So she suggested that we get on hands and knees and start pushing a little bit to see if we can get that little bit of cervix to go away and for his head to come down just a little bit. So we did. I got on my hands and knees and I pushed as much as I could. And no lie, that pain of pushing on my hands and knees when I was 9.5 centimeters was the worst part of my whole labor. It was agonizing. I couldn't take it. I was trying so hard, but I could not do it. Or I felt like I couldn't do it. I was doing it and she was coaching me through it. And finally, what ended up happening was I was pushing on my hands and knees and his head finally made that last turn. And then I got an overwhelming urge to push and I was like, screw this hands and knees. I am not doing this anymore. So I flipped on my back and I pushed on my back for about 20 minutes and he was born. So in these last few minutes before he was born, Beth is calling my provider. She called another nurse to come in. It was actually the nurse who had checked me at my house. She was working triage and she came in to be in for my birth. So everybody was there. I remember looking at the clock right at 3 a.m. and saying, I am going to do this with this next contraction because I cannot do this anymore. So I looked at the clock and I pushed as hard as I possibly could and he was born. I looked at his head and his body as he was coming out. And I remember in that split second, I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited because we didn't know if he was a boy or a girl at this point. And I was so excited to know. I was like, oh my God, I'm about to find out. And then he came out and it was, apparent that he was a boy. And my husband was like, it's a boy. And I'm like, it's a boy. And I'm crying. I'm going nuts. And I was just so happy and so proud of myself and just so empowered after that happened because I did it. I had prepared myself so much for this birth and going into it knowing that I really did not want to get an epidural and I was able to do that. And I just remember feeling like Superwoman. Like there is nothing I can compare that feeling to. I almost felt like I was high. Like I was just so full of, I guess, adrenaline and oxytocin and I felt so good right after he was born. It's so interesting when I look back at this because going through labor myself has actually completely changed the way that I practice as a labor and delivery nurse. I feel like I can truly empathize with my patients on a level that I really never thought that I could before. And I just really value my job on a deeper level. I really felt what role Beth played for me and how I felt like I truly could not get through that without her. I mean, in every stage of my labor, I felt like, especially towards the end when I was like, I can't do this, blah, blah, I felt like I really could not get through it without her. And I really realized that my job is so much more than I thought it was. Supporting a woman as she becomes a mom is such a special gift to me. And that's what it made me realize. And it really took me having my own baby to realize this impact that I have as a labor and delivery nurse. So I am so proud to call myself an L&D nurse. I hope you have enjoyed this birth story. I feel like I'm about to cry because I haven't told it all in one setting before like this. But yeah, that is my birth story of Walter. He is 2.5 now. He's going to be 3 in February. And yeah, I feel like I remember that day so vividly in my mind, and I hope that I always do. I hope that my story has empowered you and gotten you excited if you are pregnant and you are waiting for your delivery. I hope that it's gotten you a little bit more excited about what's to come. I cannot wait until I have more birth stories on here and more people telling their stories, because I'm a big fan of birth stories. I think they are empowering and they teach. And even the traumatic ones, even the ones that don't go as planned, I think there really is such a huge value in listening to other people tell about the day that they gave birth. So that is the end of this episode. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to the end of this. My birth story obviously is very personal and very, very near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate each and every one of you for listening in.
Already feeling a little more confident about pregnancy, birth, and newborn life? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can continue to erase the unknowns and never miss an episode. And if you're looking for even more, Instagram is definitely where I hang out the most. Come join our community of more than 500,000 moms for birth education, tips, and solidarity. You can find me at mommy.labornurse. Check out today's show notes and a searchable library of every Mommy Labor Nurse podcast episode at mommylabornurse.com/podcast. And while you're there, be sure to head to the blog to learn about our online birth classes too. See you next week. And remember, you can have an even better birth no matter how you deliver.